Hi, I'm Arenda Holladay, and I'm the instructor of the Basics course, and this video is for my students, but the topic would be a benefit to anyone who knits, and that is how to weave in yarn tails for stockinette, and then I'll briefly get into for ribbing as well. It's a lot easier. So you have yarn tails when you finish knitting. And if you are knitting something that has seams, the best thing to do is run those tails into the seams when you're done. It's easier, it's quick. But what do you do if you have a situation like this, where you have a color change in the middle, or you're doing a project that does not have seams? Well, if there is stockinette stitch, the best approach is to use the duplicate stitch method. And I know that if you look this up on the internet, you're going to see a lot of suggestions. And I've got to tell you, most of them are really crappy. I suggest, and I'm going to have it for my students in their basic course materials, a series of articles by Binka Schwan on our website of Cast On called Weaving Your Yarn Tails In, and it discusses every possible method, and it shows some of the flaws with other methods. So when you're weaving in a yarn tail into fabric, you want it so that when you stretch it, it doesn't show through, it doesn't impact the stitches, and it doesn't pull free. And the only method I know that does all of those, besides spit grafting, but I'm not going to get into that, is the duplicate stitch method. And what it means is that you duplicate the stitch on the wrong side as if the yarn were continuing. And what that does is it stretches with the fabric, and if you slightly split those stitches on the back, it keeps that yarn in place and it is not pulling free or poking through to the right side. Now I know that when somebody says split a stitch, your heart starts to panic and you think it's a terrible thing. That's only if the stitch has not been knit. A knit stitch where it's been split, that's a weakness. But these are whole stitches on the back, and all it's doing is keeping it on there. Now, what I've done is I've woven it in on this side so that you can see it, and I can show you with your yarn tail how to weave it in. The biggest question that people have is, where do I start? Because I've got my yarn tail up here, and you basically want to start fairly close to the first stitch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the path of that yarn. And to me, because my grandmother always had a can of it around, or a tin, I guess would be a better word, ribbon candy. But she was an elderly German woman, so that's what you got. So I go in and I slightly split the stitch, and I slightly stitch here. Now don't panic if you don't see this path of the stitch right away, because I'm going to have some suggestions for that. Okay, then I go in to where I went out, and I am just following the path of the yarn. Again, slightly splitting. And you don't have to do this for 2 or 3 inches. Sometimes my students get so carried away that they do it for 2 or 3 inches. Nah, really only, not even, maybe 3/4 of an inch. An inch is fine. And then you're done. And you can see, makes it kind of padded here, and oh my God, it's the end of the world. No, it's not. It's not going to be noticeable in the finished product at all. And it does not show through at all. Those stitches are intact. Now, what if you don't see the path of that yarn? Because it can be kind of difficult to see. What I recommend doing is working a swatch like this, although I would have, if I were doing it to learn how to do this, I would knit it with much larger needles than normal. I think I use size 8. That's pretty large for me, but I would even go up to 10 or 11. And I knit some rows in stockinette in one color. I knit one row in a different color, and then I continue on with my main color. And what that does is it gives me a guideline for what the path of that row looks like. And if I look at it there's my knit stitches, but if I look at it on the wrong side, what I see is the path of my yarn. And I can see that it goes in here, up, And what I can do is I can thread up a different color of yarn, and I can practice that, the duplicate stitch method, on those stitches. I can just follow that path. And if you do it in much larger needles, it's going to be easier to see that. But it gives you the general idea. Through there, and then over and down. Again, Binka's articles are excellent for this, and I also have a video. I have a bunch of videos on this on my blog, which I kept for quite a while, that have these things numbered, and that's not a bad way to approach it either. But anyway, keep this in mind, that this is a great way to learn how to do it. Now, what happens if I have a situation like this? And I recently got a lot of practice in this technique because I did an intarsia design for cast on. That was something, each little star that I did had five tails, and I think I counted that there were 60 stars on one of the sweaters. So what I want to do is, when I've got a situation like this, and by the way, this is tested in the master's program, I don't want to weave in the tails like this, because that's going to do what? It's going to leave a hole. What I want to do is to weave in this tail as if this dark green yarn was continuing over here, and the light green yarn was continuing over there. And you see that what that's doing, I want it to cross at the bottom of the stitch so that it does not leave a hole. Now, I generally weave in my yarn tails after blocking, because then I'm dealing with a flatter subject, and it's easier to see. But if it's not the end of the world, like on my intarsia stars, I did it as I went, because it would have been a nightmare to do it otherwise. So I'm going to thread this up. And I'm going to follow that path. And again, I'm going to slightly split. So this yarn is going to follow this path, the dark green. I'm going to slightly split. Hold it down. You don't want to pull too tight, because that might pucker the right side. And I'm only going to do a couple of stitches because I want to get to ribbing. Now, if you have reverse stockinette as your right side, there's a much better technique that you can use. It's not duplicate stitch, because that means you would be duplicate stitching over those net stitches. Binka has an excellent article on that technique. And maybe at some point I'll do a video on that as well, since I have these swatches knit. Okay, and there we go. So I've duplicate stitched over those guys. Now let's check the right side. Looks okay. And now we're going to, now again, some people are concerned by the density of this. Really, I've been knitting for years, and I can tell you it is not noticeable on a finished product. Okay, I'm going in there, and I'm going down. In there. Now, one reason I stress this so much is that if you're doing our courses or one of our certification programs, one of the things that's very important for knitters to do is to be able to read their work, and they have to have a knowledge of stitch anatomy. And this is one of the things I use to test my students' ability to read their own work, because I know what a stitch looks like. This is what looks like a stitch on the right side. So that's why it's important. Now, I've got a swatch with some ribbing here, and you don't ever want to do duplicate stitch method, following the path of the yarn, on ribbing. It makes it bulky and it's ugly, particularly when there's a much better way to do it. So what I'm looking for is, I want to have a column of knit stitches that's on the wrong side. You don't want to do this on the right side. You really never want to weave in a yarn tail on the right side. And what I can do is I go into the first leg of the stitch on the right of that column of knit stitches. And I just go up as long as I want, but when I'm ready to finish, what I want to do is I want to go into, and again, I'm slightly splitting the stitches of that top knit stitch, and then I just go down a couple of stitches, into the leg of that stitch, and then I can cut it. Now, it's not, you don't really appreciate here how you don't see that. So on the right side, I'm going to weave in a little bit of green yarn on one of these columns of stitches, just to give you an idea of how invisible this is. You do not see it, and the good thing about it, it does not limit the stretchability of the ribbing at all, and it doesn't show through. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to slightly split the stitch up there, because otherwise it might show through just a tad. If it were the same color of yarn, it wouldn't really matter. And I go down just enough to lock it. And if I stretch it, you do not see that at all. It is completely invisible. Now, this is something that I always use at the top of socks that have ribbing, because it locks it in there and it is never pulling free, and it doesn't hurt the stretchability at all. So that is how you do duplicate stitch for swatches, how you can do a mid-row join. Oh, I forgot to show you this. Can you even tell that that's there? It's just totally invisible. If I had done that with what the fish hook, which most knitters like to use, believe me, you'd see it when you'd stretch. You'd see it all the way through. Perfect for multicolor work. And then we talked about ribbing.